I'm Guenter Stahl from WU Vienna and INSERT, and I'm the co-organizer of this summit. Well, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first conference with a focus on responsible global leadership, with an emphasis on responsible. And this is an important topic, one that is of growing interest to management scholars, educators and the general public. The corporate scandals of the recent past and what happened in the financial crisis, for instance, the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the near collapse of several other investment banks, have made it painfully clear that business leaders might be acting irresponsibly more often than people thought before. And they also made it painfully clear that principles such as integrity, responsibility and ethics are as important in business as shareholder value and profitability. And not only for purely ethical reasons, they're important to the survival of companies and the long-term success. I mean, Enron has ceased to exist. Arthur Andersen, formerly one of the big five accounting firms, was shut down in the wake of the Enron scandal. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, that responsible leadership is not about philanthropy or involvement or investing in community involvement projects. Although we talked about these issues today, it's also about ensuring the long-term viability of companies and protecting stakeholders from harm. So it's very much about sustainability and ensuring the long-term viability of companies. And I think it's also about credibility. A recent Business Week sponsored study found that more than 2/3 of Fortune 500 companies claim that social responsibility is an important part of their mission, and that integrity is one of their core values, which is great, but obviously these values won't do any good if they are just on paper. And this gap between what CEOs often claim is important or valued and what is actually practiced in most organizations in terms of CSR and ethics, this gap, at least for me personally, is one of the motivators for becoming involved here in this conference. I mean, one thing that I like about this conference is that it's not a purely academic conference. It brings together leading scholars in the field, which is also great because I know, many of the publications of these scholars, but some of them I haven't met yet. So it's a great opportunity to meet colleagues here. But what I also like is that it provides an opportunity for academic researchers to discuss these issues with practitioners, consultants, law scholars or lawyers, executives of large corporations. Basically an opportunity for academia and practice to blend and maybe cross-fertilize one another, right, and share best practices. Well, I've not recently, but 2 years ago, embarked on a large-scale research project on the antecedents of responsible leader behavior or managerial behavior. And we are looking at these issues at different levels. Now, at the micro level, the perspective of the individual manager, we are, for instance, interested in the leadership challenges and ethical dilemmas that managers face in an increasingly complex, dynamic, and interconnected world, right? In a world where many practices that were formerly considered acceptable have come into public scrutiny. And we are also interested, that's related to it, in the challenges that international managers, international assignees face in their countries in terms of ethical dilemmas, especially in an emerging market context. So that's more the individual level. Then at a meso level or group level, we are, for instance, interested in the link between top management team characteristics and corporate social performance. For instance, how does diversity at the top management team level How might it affect a company's social performance? For instance, one of the hypotheses that we are testing is that companies, for instance, that are high on gender diversity, they might be better at managing diversity issues. That's fairly obvious, but we also believe that companies that are high on ethnic diversity, national diversity in terms of composition of the top management team, that they might do better. Not only financially, there are studies that have already proven that, but also in terms of their social performance. So that's something we are interested at the team level. And then at the corporate level, for instance, in one of the studies that I'm currently engaged in, we are looking at how large multinational companies are implementing their CSR strategies worldwide. And the role of individual managers then in the implementation process. For instance, we distinguish between 3 different CSR approaches, what we call the global approach, the locally adapted approach, and the transnational approach, and how companies implement the different approaches. So now the global approach is very much about companies that have adopted the global approach. They develop universal codes of conduct, guidelines that they apply to every situation, every country where they do business. So headquarters perspective is very important here, and the locally adapted approach is in some ways the mirror opposite of the global approach. It emphasizes the need for sensitivity to local conditions. Basically, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So executives that have adopted this approach tend to be as responsive as possible to the needs of local stakeholders. And then a third approach, what we call the transnational approach, sort of adopts a hybrid strategy based on the assumption that global and local approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive, and that in many situations, economic needs, stakeholder expectations, political pressures, etc., demand the companies pursue both a local and a global approach simultaneously. And obviously, each approach has certain trade-offs, right, and challenges associated with the implementation. And in one of our studies, we are looking, for instance, how companies that have adopted transnational approach, right, how they implement it. And our preliminary findings, so far we have conducted, I think, 30 case studies of global companies, are that the transnational approach is better able than the other 2 approaches to help companies coordinate the global CSR strategies and to implement them worldwide. The one piece of advice I would say is, our keynote speaker today talked a lot about core values, and there's a lot of talk about company mission statements, etc., and how integrity is important, but it's really about implementing that and living it on a daily basis. So it's not something that can be imposed by the top management by having an inspiring mission statement or a set of core values, in a frame hanging in the CEO's office. It's about living these values like integrity, honesty, social responsibility on a daily basis. And that's a huge challenge, I think, that every company faces. And, for global companies operating in 100 different countries around the world, with a workforce that differs in terms of, their cultural orientations, etc., it becomes even more challenging to make sure that not only managers, but, also rank and file employees live these values on a daily basis.